welcome, Dr. Fader. Welcome to Autism Spa. I've been a long admirer of your work and what you've done for the community. I've always wanted to sit down and talk with you about kind of your background, what got you into this field, what got you focused in the areas of research that you focused on, and how you think kids on the spectrum can benefit with some of the work that you've been doing. So take it away. Thank you.
Shahriar, it's great to be here. And it's really great to hear about the work that you're doing to try to bring more stuff to our families. Because, as parents of kids with autism, I'm one too, we don't get enough information.
It's true. It's true.
I'm just kidding. We get flooded with cure your kid this way, or you must do this, or you're a bad parent, or oh my God, it's just so much stuff. But you're asking me about how I got into this business of autism and developmental challenges. When I was an undergrad, I was actually a biomedical engineering student, and thought I was going to make like fake arms for people and stuff like that. I grew up on The $6 Million Man. I don't know if you remember that show.
Of course.
Hey, and MASH. Those are my two big influences. And so I go to Boston University, where they had built the Boston arm, and quickly got into brain theory. So mathematical modeling of how your brain functions. It was just so fascinating to me. To really understand that, I had to take a psychology course, and the psychology course required that I volunteer. And I volunteered at a place called the Massachusetts Association for the Blind, which housed in a residential unit a whole bunch of teenagers, boys and girls, with congenital rubella syndrome. So that's German measles. Mom gets it during pregnancy. And the kids were fairly, the ones that I saw were fairly uniformly exhibiting what looked like autism plus blindness, and they were deaf. And so I learned actually behavioral methods of working with them using kind of sign language, a lot of which was hand over hand, dancing to really loud bass music with them, and doing like daily care. How do you help someone feed themselves and stuff like that. We did some work things. And for the ones who could see a little bit, I learned good job. It was like my first sign language back in college. And as I went through, the brain theory stuff, and I was always wanting to go to medical school, and got into medical school, I stuck with a lot of this work. And the Navy actually put me through med school and stationed me out here after medical school at Balboa Hospital here in San Diego, where I did general psychiatry, and then I really liked child psychiatry. Did that in Tripler Army Medical Center in Honolulu. And that was right during the first Gulf War, when I was stationed out there. And my 7 months before that, by that time, I had been a teacher at a school for autistic adults between undergrad and college briefly. It's a terrible experience. These adults were bussed in from wherever they were living. And we were doing ABA, we were doing intensive discrete trial with them to try to help them be functional, learn pre-vocational skills. And can I say this? They were enslaved. Yeah. They were basically people who were warehoused, brought to a place where their job was to take apart defective soap because they were supposed to be productive. The little bit of recreation that was allowed, and we were supposed to train them to do that. And when they didn't like it, we had to, contain them and teach them to not be aggressive. I suppose they were given medications. I didn't really know that part back at that point. And when we got a little understaffed, and I remember being out on a beach with no water in the hot Boston summer, and I quit the next day. I was like, you can't do this to people, and I'm not going to be part of it. They were very angry. You can't just leave us. I'm like, you can't do this to people. And so I thought I was going to get way away from developmental disorders and maybe study adolescent drug abuse or something like that. But then my son was born, and then we moved right after he was born. We moved from San Diego to Honolulu. And about 9 months in, he hadn't been saying much. And then he said a full sentence. He said, "I see the birdie." My wife and I were there. We look at each other like, what? Then he didn't say anything, after that. I think he had said, before that, he had said shoes. I mean, it's like, not mama, not papa. And he didn't know, I was a child psychiatry fellow, and I was at a program that specialized in early intervention for kids with autism and related disorders. But I didn't know better. I was like a first-time parent. And because I was a trainee, there was a blind spot in the program. Like, people had seen us, they'd seen our kid, but nobody picked up on the fact that, what a mess, until he was closer to about, maybe 20 months, and he was standing in a corner biting himself. I'm like, oh my God. And then they go back and look at, they'd actually taken some video of him at age 1 for a special test of attachment that's kind of famous in developmental psychology, called the Ainsworth strange situation test, where you take a baby and they're with their mom, and then the mom leaves, and then a stranger comes in, and then the mom comes back, and you see how the child responds. Do they get worried when their parent leaves? How do they respond to the stranger? Do they greet the mom when mom comes back? And they had seen my kid as a little aloof, and then another kid as a little clingy, right? So just a little, well, so, yada, yada, yada. I don't know, 8 months later, they come back and they look at these tapes and are like, oh, now we see it. Like, now you see it? And I was in total denial. We're at a developmental pediatrician appointment. This is at an Army hospital. And I'm saying, well, he's not autistic. Yeah. And then because it was the Navy and they have the money, and because we're in Honolulu, they bring in like all these heavy hitters from all over the world. Nice. And so this heavy hitter named Magda Campbell comes in from Bellevue Hospital in New York. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they were doing like the bee's knees kind of research in autism at Bellevue at the time. And they were first doing some of the original trials with antipsychotic medications to see if kids would look better. And she looks at him and she says, yeah, he's got autism. And my wife is like, well, what's that? And I'm just like, hang dog. She has no idea what's happening.
How many years ago? How many years ago was this?
This is 1992. Okay. Early 1992, right before our daughter's going to be born. Yeah. So it was like our second kid was just on the cusp. Yep. So she says, well, you should probably go to Los Angeles and hospitalize the entire family, and do the Lovaas thing, right? Because this is right when Lovaas is doing his seminal work on discrete trial ABA, and I guess he was hospitalizing entire families at that moment. That would be like the thing to do. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting things on my screen that I have to flip up because it's I'm on my iPhone at the moment. Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, so my wife's like, we're not going to hospitalize him, and so Magda Campbell says, well, then he's just going to be a pet. Yeah. A pet at home. And so anyway, so we didn't go to LA. We didn't hospitalize him. I was in the Navy anyway, at an Army facility. There's no way that was going to happen, and certainly at that formal treatment paid for autism in the service, because it was developmental. So for some reason that didn't count, or maybe the schools were supposed to do it. Yeah. But we did do kind of a full bore like speech and OT, and I stopped seeing kids on the spectrum at that moment. I've been in training for a while, and I was thinking it's just too confusing for me. Yeah. And he got an ABA school program, the local 0 to 3 program, and he learned stuff. He learned to, I could do this. I can still do this. He's 31, and he'll sit down. And said a few words and stuff. We wanted, to do everything. So we went to a family therapist because of the stress. We went to a psychiatrist who told us we were going to divorce because most such families divorce. We're like, really? That's not helpful. Yeah. Yeah. And after several months of this, and he was, I guess, doing better. We were trying some different pills and things, antidepressants, whatever. My boss comes to me and says, read this. And I'm like, I've been reading a ton of stuff on autism, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And he gives me this article from 0 to 3, which is this national organization that is involved in early childhood mental health. And it's by Stanley Greenspan, and it's about engaging kids with autism in a way that was absolutely different from ABA. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. That's a nice little article, and didn't make any sense to me because I've been trained in ABA, and I was horrified, of course, because I'd seen the adults before, and the warehousing and that stuff, and I didn't like that, but it was the only thing I knew.
Yeah. And
we were doing, and it just didn't make any sense to me until a couple months later. This kind of like, what Greenspan was saying was, kids aren't really going to learn anything useful unless it matters to them. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? He needs to learn how to speak. He needs to learn his letters. He needs, if he doesn't learn that stuff, how's he going to get anywhere? So a few months later, my kid, who's like way into Thomas the Tank Engine, you know how that goes.
Sure.
Way
Yeah.
His baby sister's been born. That's a whole nother story. She was great for him, but a whole nother story there. And she's going after his Thomas toy.
Yeah.
And she's crawling, right?
Yeah.
And the next sentence comes out of his mouth. He says, "Madi, go on mama." And we're like, our jaws dropped again.
Wow.
So 9 months, a sentence, and then nothing, right? And now this is like 25 months, 26 months old or something. Whatever, his sister's she's crawling, so she's like 5 months old or something. So I guess he was 29 months old. And he says, "Madi, go mama." And we look at each other again and our jaws drop.
Wow.
And then I put it together. The reason why he pulled it all together, at least in that moment, it seemed to me, was that he cared about his sister taking his toy. And he had this great solution. Don't take my toy, go to mom. Which is like great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so then all the gears, all the tumblers clicked, and we were like, oh, that's what Greenspan's talking about. And the Navy was great. I had stayed an extra year at Pearl Harbor, actually opened a child psychiatry clinic there. Instead of, we had hoped to go to Japan. Like our dream as a family was to serve in the Navy, go to Japan, because that was like really cool, and then, do whatever in our career. But instead, we actually got orders to National Naval Medical Center, and got to work directly with Stanley Greenspan and Serena Weider. Working with them means you see Stanley like quarterly, and he was a brilliant and very odd man, who traumatized my wife by saying, "Well, you're in the trenches now. You have to close these circles of interaction," which I'll explain in a minute.
Yeah.
And he teaches her how to play, and she's like, she wasn't the kind of person who was ever like playing with stuff. That just wasn't who she was. And I'd come home, because I had to work too. Yeah. And she'd say, if I have to close another, effing circle, although she used the real word, she was like not happy about it. But she was great, and she's a great player now. And then we saw Stanley quarterly at an exorbitant $500 an hour, and I don't even charge that, in my practice.
Yeah.
Now, 30 something years later. And then Serena, we saw like 3 times a week. We saw her favorite speech therapist, who is engaging but tough, Diane Lewis. And we saw an OT, Valerie Dijon, who was really great and play-based. I liked her a lot. But we were like doing this full bore kind of thing. And nobody, who could pay for that? I mean, it's like hundreds of dollars per session here and there on Navy pay. I mean, it doesn't pay very much. And the insurance, TRICARE, at the time was Champus, didn't pay anything. They're like, well, this is developmental. And we're like, but... So we do this for like 3 years. And I take extra jobs. I moonlight. I start my own private practice to be able to pay for it all. And it worked really well. Wow. The kid did great. And, when my time was coming up, I was like, well, I can't keep doing this. This is unsustainable, right? To do this, closing circles and doing all this other stuff on Navy pay. And so I planned to get out of the service, and we came back here because we thought San Diego actually was a much friendlier place than the DC area, where everybody's trying to crush people. So I left my job. I was actually chief of child psychiatry at National Naval Medical Center at the time. It's kind of a big job. But got out, did private practice here, first in managed care, which is awful. Couldn't afford anything there. And the big irony was that when we did those 3 years of fairly intensive work, since then, he's had a speech therapist, the same one, for about 25 years now, but hasn't really done all that much more other than getting a play partner. We had a college-age play partner at the time who helped us as an extra pair of hands. Yeah. And, instead of institutionalized, he ended up at an institution. He ended up at Cal Poly Pomona. He's an engineer. He's, just got another job. And, look, if you know, he's kind of a quirky kid, but he turned out great. And in the meantime, when I got into this developmental stuff, which wasn't the ABA stuff, I learned that it helps you help people become who they will be, right? And, the world is your oyster, not you're going to be unwrapping soap for a living and institutionalized. And it's much less, how we talk about social justice and colonialist kind of attitudes? It's the anti-colonialist thing, the developmental stuff. It's like helping people be who they will be within the culture of their families, not this, like, this is appropriate and this isn't, and you need to do this kind of stuff, which it turns out doesn't even work very well. We were talking the other day, I think on email, about how there's all this research on ABA, and they say, well, there's nothing else that works. It turns out, if you study those papers, they're not well done. They're not well executed. You said you're a tech guy, so maybe you're also a numbers guy. If you look at the statistical methodology that's used in the vast, vast majority of those behaviorist papers, they're using a single subject design, otherwise known as multiple baseline design, which inflates the apparent effects to such a point that if you actually do good stats on it, you can't find an effect size. So you might be able to say something's better than something, I don't know, but you can't actually say it works. So the way that we measure effect of a treatment in medicine these days is the idea of something we call effect size. And in mental health, a moderate effect size is great because we usually don't get better than that. And, there's this number, right, that you get from it. And like, so 0.2 to 0.5 or 6, and you're like really in there. Well, it turns out in the most comprehensive and sophisticated meta-analysis from 2019, Project AIM is what it was called, by a person named Michael Sandbank, a woman whose name is Michael. But anyway, she and her team found that for this floor-timey stuff, which I promise I'll describe before we run out of time, and for naturalistic developmental behavioral stuff, which is almost like a hybrid between the structured old ABA stuff and some of the developmental stuff, that for those two, and I think because of the naturalistic part of naturalistic developmental, and of course the developmental naturalistic part of the developmental behavioral or developmental relationship-based stuff, has a moderate effect size for social communication, which is the core of what happens, in autism that makes it so difficult for people. And they couldn't find an effect size for traditional ABA because the research isn't there. You've got thousands of papers that are useless and a few really good studies in the other methodologies. So, all right, so I've been talking about this developmental stuff for a little while. Actually, I'm going to give you one more piece before I go into what it is.
Sure.
So I'm a doctor. I'm a very privileged guy. I mean, I've been very lucky in my life. My family got out of some very bad messes before most of them were killed in World War II. They got me personally out of a mess in Pennsylvania when there was like terrible discrimination and against me and co-religionists there. I got a bad head injury, and so they got me out, and I got a good education. I got a Navy scholarship. I figure, okay, and I was able to treat my kid because I was a doctor and I could moonlight. And it just killed me that other people couldn't get the treatment that my kid got. So now I'm medical director of a company called Positive Development that, because the research has really shifted and it's really clear to the insurance companies who actually have to pay for this stuff. Oh, and there was a Department of Defense study that looked at outcomes for traditional ABA that showed 76% no change, 9% worse, 15% had something a little bit better, but that's not very good outcomes. No. So the insurance companies are basically flocking to my new company saying, yeah, we'll give you contracts to do this stuff because A, it's less intensive. You're not giving a kid a 40-hour job, and B, seems to work.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, so anyway, So what is this thing that I'm talking about? The whole thing kind of is leveraged on this idea of a circle of interaction, something that I'm just yammering at you, so we're not really having many of those.
Yeah.
But the idea is this, like if you have somebody, let's take the simplest example of a child who's not, talking very much, not engaging very much with the world, and maybe just very focused on like a piece of carpet or something. And in its most elemental moment, the child is doing something and we observe, we're looking at what the child's doing, and we take a little bit of time to do that. And as we do that, we think, well, how might I be able to join this child's world? Well, one way to do that might be to slip your hand under where the child's pawing the carpet, and just, at least you're joining the world a little bit, right? Very simplistic, right? Well, when you do that sort of thing, sometimes, not always, sometimes the child will like put your hand away and keep pawing the carpet. Okay, so that feels like nothing, but it actually is something. There was this little, like, the kid's doing something, you did something, the kid did something in response. And so you have this single cycle, this single circle, as we call it, of interaction. But you can build on that. You can do that, a bunch of times. And if you've ever played an instrument like guitar or learned a new skill, you know that you have to do a whole bunch of things. I have to decline a call. You know that you have to do a whole bunch of things over and over to sort of get a rhythm going before you can kind of build on it much. But you get a bunch of those circles going with the child, and after a while, it kind of becomes its own game, and you can start riffing off it a little bit. Like you can put two hands under, and the child might start looking up at you, and at some point, you feel this sort of connection with the child. And a lot of times, it is a verbal connection. If the child has vision, some of our kids don't, but the child has vision. A lot of times you see what we call a gleam in the eye. They kind of look at you like, hey,
you're there.
Like, hey, we're here. And maybe that's where it ends at the moment. But with gentle persistence, that builds and builds and builds. And all those things, by the way, that are important, that we like to teach, that people have liked to teach through, traditional ABA. That's a $17 billion industry, by the way, ABA. So a lot of money goes into that. So all the things that people like to teach that way, you can actually fold into these little interactions. Something's behind, something's above. You're using some language and pairing it with that, and it works from there. For the kids who are maybe more verbal, and maybe some of these kids who they talk about their favorite thing. When I give talks, I happen to, my dad's on the spectrum, my son's on the spectrum, and I've been accused. So I show my Triceratops pictures because I happen to like Triceratops. So, you can kind of go through picture after picture after picture after picture, a whole cascade on the PowerPoint of Triceratops pictures. And when you're a parent and you've got a kid like me or like some of our kids, it's pretty exhausting. But how does this like circle of interaction thing fit in with that? Well, if you're sitting and talking with somebody or playing with them and they're yammering on about the thing that's important to them, well, then you do sort of join that and try, you play dumb, or you are dumb usually by comparison, and you're asking, well, wait, I didn't understand that. And so you're joining them by getting them to explain stuff to you. And eventually, because of your, inadequacies, they have to bend a little bit. And those same concepts that you're trying to get into that have to do with theory of mind, because they do want the audience a lot of times. And you when you're giving someone attention, and you can leverage that relationship that you're building for learning. And it's painstaking, I understand. And we have kids who are addicted to like machines and things that we have to, take into account. We can talk about that maybe another time. But this methodology of helping someone be just calm enough to be able to interact, we didn't really talk about that, and then connecting with them and having a flow of interaction that's meaningful to the child, hopefully meaningful to you as well. Gets fun. If it's not fun, then we got to figure that out. Turns out to be able to be a basis, a foundation for all learning, and for it's what happens in typical life anyway. We just have to be more intentful about it. I'll leave you with one other piece of research that I think is really interesting. There's a guy named John Constantino. I think this guy should get a Nobel in medicine. He's done a lot of the recent genetic work, in autism. He's the guy who, pretty much figured out that for your run-of-the-mill person with autism spectrum disorder, there's maybe, I don't know, a couple hundred genes that code for how object focused you're going to be versus social focused. And if you flip a bunch of them over to the object focus side, you get geekier and geekier until maybe you're way out there on the spectrum and it's really hard to connect with people. If you flip them the other way, you might be more sensitive to people or sensitive, so much so way out on the other side that you might be, like we call it, borderline personality or even psychotic. And you probably know that there are genetic relationships between autism, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, also ADHD, that kind of run together. So he's sort of figured this part out. He's also figured out a lot of the disparities. I gave a whole talk on this a couple months ago. I've been giving it all year about how kids of color, black kids, he was looking at like 555 black kids, finding out that they had more intellectual disability. And why? Because they're diagnosed late and they don't get intervention to help their cognitive function. And so then they end up with intellectual disability, what we used to call mental retardation. Yeah. Not because they need to, but because we don't identify these kids and take care of them the way we take care of, white kids. Yeah. So that, but he illuminating for me. What he found was that for autistic symptoms, like the perseverations and trouble with social communication and that kind of thing, there were 3 specific kinds of genes that tended to would have more severe symptoms of autism later on. And those 3 that he found out had to do with attention, social gaze, and motor planning. And developmental model, it's helping someone be calm enough to be attentive to the world around them, connect with them, that gleam in the eye, social gaze, and then that circle of interaction where the person can respond in a way that's meaningful to me. And it's like, the tumblers are now in place. What we're doing fits with about genetics. It's crazy cool. And, so I've been doing this for I've been in this field since 1970, but I've been doing the developmental stuff since about 1993, I guess. Yeah, 93. And now the research is just becoming so clear and supportive for the developmental thing. And so it makes me so happy to be doing positive development, this company, and helping other people who do developmental work to get insurance companies to pay for it, to bring it to people who now we can bring it to everybody. It's not for the haves. It's everybody. It should be people of color.
It should be for everyone. Wow, this is really exciting because I'm shocked at how similar our experience has been with our kids, right? The same frustration as kids being warehoused in a public school. My son was warehoused in a special needs school. God bless him with quadriplegic kids, with physically disabled kids, because the school system didn't know what to do with them, right? They were just overwhelmed. And it took us having to get a child advocate to get a private placement. It shouldn't have to. It shouldn't have to come to that. But like your outrage as you were observing your child, imagine, what if some other family didn't have the wherewithal to go get a child advocate? Their kid would be relegated into that world forever. School systems weren't designed to come and say, hey, let us pay $30,000 a year to place your kid in a private school because we can't handle them and we don't want to lose state funding. But that's a whole nother conversation. And then the ABA and that net positive effect of not working. Clearly, so many kids are in that. Insurance pays for it, but it doesn't work. And if it does, it's very, very small. So I'm really, really glad and excited to learn about what you're doing with positive development. And I want to make sure I get the company contact info on our site. And that some insurance companies are adopting this new method because they've been stuck with ABA, like tunnel vision, for so long, forcing kids to go down this tunnel, even if it doesn't work. And that's...
Well, yeah, and we actually lobby, and we could probably talk about this another time because I got to stop in a couple minutes, but we have a bill in the California legislature right now Senate Bill 562. It's like the fourth or fifth time we've done this, and we can get it through the legislature. It's getting a governor to sign it. That basically just adds the word developmental to the state law that talks about covering insurance coverage for all evidence-based treatments. It's already clear. It's been clear. We had a court case we won in 2010, I think, that developmental approaches are evidence-based, but you've got lobbying organizations spending hundreds of thousands, I estimate even $1 million a year, just to protect the discrete trial lobby, because a $17 billion industry, you're going to protect it. It's like pharma. What I will say is that I don't think anybody goes into autism treatment, however they do it, without thinking and believing that they're doing best for kids and families. Sure. Nobody does that. I think what happens is that money takes over, like it does in pharma, and people's ethics are different. They get bent by that. And then these ideas arise where people are no longer working under a scientific null hypothesis. By the way, for positive development, I'm in charge of figuring out our outcomes. And my hypothesis is, my boss actually loves to hear this, my CEO, what we do doesn't work. That's my byline. What we do doesn't work. And then I get the outcomes to see if I'm wrong. I would like to be wrong. I believe I'm wrong. But if I'm not trying to prove that this doesn't work, then I'm not being scientifically honest. That's not what pharma does. Oh my God, listen to my podcasts on duty to warn about antidepressants and suicidality. Just take a second to do that at some point.
I will do that. I will
blow your mind.
Tell me about the bill number again.
Oh, it's S as in Sam, B as in boy, Senate Bill 562.
Okay. We will keep an eye on that one. And I have a lot of friends up and down California in the legislature. We're going to get behind this one. Wow, this has been amazing. I'm overwhelmed. It was a lot, but I think you ended with exactly where I wanted you to end, which is the change, the transformational change we want to make in this industry and in this field and in the bureaucratic mindset, not individually dishonest people, but the bureaucratic mindset that has consumed our kids and have left them relegated, warehoused in different boxes with no real benefit or accountability for their improvement and quality of life. So we're going to talk more. This is fantastic. I know you got to run, but wow, this has been fantastic, Dr. Fader. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. We'll do it again.
Thank you. Good night.